Welcome to another episode of DWTC. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts. Today, I'm joined by entrepreneur, efficiency expert, and current chief of staff at Healium, Lydia Melton. I've known Lydia for several years now around the business scene. She's got a super interesting background that includes things like being a prior founder and owner of a European pub and artisan cafe that I used to frequent, prior president of the Missouri Restaurant Association, director of marketing for a tech startup, CEO of an online tech automation company, and her current gig at Healium, all of which we'll learn more about, I'm sure, throughout the course of today's show. But one of my favorite things about Lydia is how she and I connected. We both have a heart for women in business, and specifically women in business and how that relates to a faith journey. I personally enjoyed several hours of coffee and lunch getting to know Lydia better over the last several years. And so I'm so glad to have her on the pod today to share her insights and wisdom. So let's jump right in and give the listeners what they came here for. Now, Lydia, I know you fairly recently made a job move. Tell us what you're up to now.
Yeah, so Chief of Staff of Healium, which if you haven't heard of Healium, we are a VR and mobile app company that deals with mental wellness. So we take the biofeedback that people have like on their Apple Watch or their EEG headband and help them change what they see on the screen during a meditation. So if you're ever that person that's like sitting there and you're like, am I doing this right? Well, you actually know because it will tell you. So that is currently what is happening in my world.
I love that. My husband's actually done some, I want to call it therapies for his PTSD through Healium. And I've absolutely loved seeing those results and looking at his data. So super interesting work that you all are doing. And I will make sure to link Healium in the show notes so folks can go online and look. But there's a ton of publications out there around what Lydia and the team at Healium are doing. Super, super interesting. And as an employer, definitely something that I would recommend looking into. So today specifically, we're going to jump into the topic of burnout amongst employees and leadership at employers. It's such a buzzword, I feel these days, but it is a real thing. And there's a ton of data around this and a ton of conversations around it. I notice in a lot of HR magazines, we're seeing a lot of content around burnout. So Lydia, in your opinion, what does burnout look like in organizations?
Yeah. So before we get too far, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so excited to nerd out on this. You know my background in the restaurant industry, and the thing about restaurants is they are super high turnover and they're very labor intensive. And so for me, I feel very passionate that like this is a very expensive cost that most people have no idea how much they're paying because they're not putting it on a P&L. It's not like you review the profit and loss at the end of the month and you see it as a line item, but the thing is that it's there. You do incur it. It just gets absorbed elsewhere and it starts with burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say when I'm looking at data from an HR perspective, I would probably take a look at that turnover replacement data and what the impact is on that, what the reduction in efficiency is when it comes to lower employee engagement scores. You know, my husband worked in the mortgage industry. He's a broker now, but prior to being a broker, the data in the mortgage industry, highest suicide rates, which surprised me. But that was a report that I saw recently. So definitely manifests in a lot of different ways, whether it's from a lack of engagement, meaning a lack of efficiency, or meaning somebody's just going to bail on a role, turnover, or the worst case scenario, somebody has such a heavy mental load that they feel like they can't manage it anymore personally. So yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this as a topic that really matters. So do you feel like this tends to manifest differently by age group?
Ooh, I would say for a long time, it manifested itself by checking out or just like doing the bare minimum, right? And then it was like overnight, this concept of ghosting just appeared on employers. And I was like, what is this? What is happening? How could another human being do this to another human being? Because it's not simply you leaving, right? Someone has to pick up the slack. And so when I think of burnout, I think of it like a flame. It spreads. Like it starts with one person and you really have to watch and control the fire and help them, to have better wellness so that it doesn't spread and affect everybody else. So yeah, to that end, I would say like how we see people coping and dealing with it is much different now. People are much more aware, I would say, of their mental health, and they are more likely to vocalize that they need help. But typically, what I see it happening is people waiting until the last minute and then saying, I can't do it. They just put up flags and they kind of check out. And I don't know if that's part of an experience thing. Like maybe the younger you are, the less personal experience you have navigating those challenges. But I would say it's definitely prevalent.
Listening to you say that makes me think of so many things. When ghosting started coming on the scene professionally, I was mind blown. I am at the older end of a millennial. I was born in 82. And so that is something that like I couldn't comprehend. But when I would hear colleagues or peers from other organizations talking about ghosting, it's really not something that I experienced very often, even though I've been in HR for over 20 years. And I think it does speak to like an experience thing, but I don't mean a lack of experience in the workplace based on age. I mean an experience like if we're talking about recruiting, for example, I just rarely had a person ghost me through that process. However, ours was a personal process. Any organization that I've ever been at, even if we're using templates for emails, I make sure it's a personalized process, which makes it harder for a person to then check out of. Like when you're thinking about applying for a job on, let's say, LinkedIn, for example, favorite platform to post jobs, find jobs, but it's so easy if they can just click that apply now button. Mm-hmm. They're not really attached to that company. It feels like they're just throwing, their resume up against the wall. And so it's easier from an employer's perspective just to hit decline, and not actually send personalized messages. So I think from an employee experience perspective, whether it's the beginning with recruitment, like what I'm talking about, or an employee that doesn't have a manager that seems to care or a team lead that they're connected with, there's a ton of data around relationships at workplace. Do you feel like you've got a work best friend? You're not going to just ghost your employer if you've got those touch points. But if you feel like you're a number, you're a large organization, no one's paying attention to you. And I don't mean micromanaging, but like they care about you. It's so much harder to walk away. So I do think that it speaks to like a culture thing, not a culture like what generation are you from, but a work culture and what that level of connectedness is. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think it's a yes and. Oftentimes it depends on who you surround yourself with, which in the workplace is culture, but it could also be what their friends are doing. In the restaurant world, it was a much younger demographic. So that's really who I'm used to. I don't often see that in other professional places of employment. It's far less common. But I think that goes to the importance of training, hiring, really onboarding them into your culture and not making people a number, because what goes around comes around, right? And so, it's just the investment that you put in people.
Yeah, onboarding is a really good point. I've talked about that on a previous episode and I talked to several clients about this too. We go through the recruitment process and then we say, hey, you're here. And a lot of folks just want to like set them in their seat and they'll say, well, they're a smart individual. They're going to be crafting this role for themselves. And when I was younger in my career, I remember thinking, oh yeah, that feels good. I get to create the role. But then as the days go by, you realize I'm not really sure if I'm succeeding, if I'm doing the thing that the person really wants me to do, what I'm supposed to do next. And ultimately what I'm saying is how to measure success. And so we take professionals and we say that we're honoring them by kind of turning them out to pasture, if you will. And then they feel lost and it's easier for them to disconnect from the role, I guess I would say. So from the very beginning of the onboarding process, sitting down and talking about mission, vision, values, how the role relates to the rest of the company, how to draw purpose, what the organizational structure looks like, how to get things done, like taking 4 hours, 6 hours at the onset, I know is like an investment from somebody's perspective, whether it's HR or hiring manager, CEO, depending on the size of the organization. But that speaks volumes because you're essentially teaching a person how to treat you. This matters to us. We're going to set you up in a professional way. Your technology's ready. We've got all of your data ready for you. We're ready for you to enroll in benefits, whatever that looks like, your HR payroll system set up. So we're ready and we're professional and we're organized. And that helps an employee to see, I need to be here, present, organized, professional too. And that is a lot of organizations miss the mark on that onboarding piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, people reach as low as you set the bar, and you set the bar when you show up, right? So
Yeah,
kind of sets the expectation for sure.
it does. Sets it low, unfortunately, in most places. It kind of blows my mind. I've got some clients that have plenty of money to get things set up correctly, and it's just kind of an afterthought. And what ends up happening is usually I see we're talking about a performance issue in 6 months or 9 months, and it's like, this person's not performing. My first question is always, and not because I'm an HR professional, but just because I know the way this works, I'll say, how is it set up, and explain to them. I want to see an email where it was explained to them, or I want the person who explained it to have a conversation with me. I'm going to document that. And 9.5 times out of 10, I say, we are going to meet with them and talk about this with clarity first before we get frustrated. We just cannot get frustrated before we know that it is clear, because in general, people are good and they want to succeed in their jobs in general.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming that when we sit down to have that conversation, they're going to say, oh, I didn't know. It wasn't clear, or whatever the case may be. We can clarify. And then from there, we can address a performance issue. But usually, if it's within that first year, most generally it's because of a lack of clarity through the onboarding process and not setting up clear performance expectations, whatever it is. And when that is clarified, it's almost like the very beginning again. But now you've got some love wounds in the background, because now they realize you didn't set them up for success and you almost made them fail. So I could preach on that all day long, though.
Probably one of the biggest places I see people trip up is HR has approved this hire, right? And they're so excited to have them on the team. And they go through all of the like HR onboarding day and they're excited. And then they get paired with the person who most likely is best at that job, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that they're the best leader or the best trainer, right? And this person still has a job to do. So not only are they trying to do their job, but they're trying to train the new person. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on that moment, that like brief amount of time in that person's training of what this looks like, and equipping that person to even train someone new.
That's so true. And then you've got multiple dynamics at play, because you've got the new hire that needs something. And then you've got this pre-existing individual who, are they happy about the training role that they've been placed in at the corner of their desk? How are they managing their other workload? Does this mean we're just piling on them and they have to work above and beyond their scheduled time, whatever that looks like? So then what level of effort are they going to give when all of these variables at play? Yeah.
Yeah. Heaven forbid it affect their pay. Oh man. That would be the worst.
Right. Well, that goes into if they're not set up correctly from the perspective of an exempt or non-exempt employee, then if they're doing additional work, they should get paid for it. And most generally, a lot of employees that are taking on the task of training a new employee, a lot of times they're misclassified in their roles, because maybe they hit the salary exemption, but not the does my role affect the bottom line of the organization exemption? And so they're misclassed. So they're not making the money that they should. Yeah. A lot of HR stuff to talk about in there. So let's talk about the domino effect of burnout. What is that? And how does one employee's burnout affect others?
Yeah. So the moment that you don't do your job, right? That affects someone else who, one, probably needed you to do that particular task. Like it affects their direct workflow. So sometimes what I see most common is people will step up and they'll try and fill in the gaps because it's their friend. Or they're just going through something. And that's like fine if they truly are going through something. And usually they don't raise their hand and say, I'm going through something. This is where I'm at. Usually it takes a little bit of like the dominoes starting to fall before people start either A, to realize the symptoms of this is what's going on, or B, for that person to even recognize, oh, what I'm doing is actually affecting others. Sometimes we do all of this unconsciously, right? But so then you have this other person who's stepping up, and you can only run for so long, right? Like you can give a little bit extra, but if you're doing it day after day after day and there's no end in sight, I would say it's really easy to see in companies where you lose an employee, and instead of replacing the employee, they disperse the task amongst others. and there's no looking at their work plate to see what tasks can be removed, right? And usually the employee doesn't feel like they can speak up and say something because that's just the way it is or for whatever reason. And then maybe somebody else quits. And then it just all kind of starts to implode.
Yeah, that's true. And there are certainly times where we can disseminate work, either because we've seen efficiencies through AI or other technology utilization. Like there are times and places for that. And I love assessing that with an organization, but we can't leave the other employees and their opinions out of it. I totally agree. Like we have to look at the other workflows and workloads of the other employees before we just start dumping. Most of this comes down to communication. Having the conversations. This is what we're thinking. What are your thoughts? What am I missing? What are my blind spots? From a leader's perspective, there are so many times where we think we know. And maybe it's because we've done that role in the past and we saw how it operated and now we're leading a team or whatever it is. But we've got to remember, like, there is a perspective of the frontline worker or whoever's doing the task. And then there's a perspective of the leader of the task. And those two perspectives have to collaborate, or a good final decision isn't made and it's short-sighted. And then it just perpetuates this domino effect that you're talking about.
Yeah. Or things evolve. You know, you're doing more because, I don't know, you have more leads now or what, you know what I mean? Like things just change over time. It might have been some time since you actually did that job. And so just getting back in there, getting in on the deep end with them and really reviewing the workload for efficiency is huge.
So what do you think? You've mentioned it a little bit, but the relationship between burnout and turnover?
So first off, burnout costs you. Whether you can assign a percent or not is really hard. But if they didn't even show up mentally for 20, 30% of their day, let's just say they gave you 20, 30% less. Think about that from a salary perspective in terms of what you're paying someone. That's a lot of money over the course of a year. Now multiply that by multiple people. Okay, so if somebody leaves, which burnout typically is the first time, usually people, sometimes they'll get headhunted, sometimes they'll decide they want to make a career change. I mean, there's definitely like a time and a place for that, right? But there are many times in which the person doesn't know it yet, but they've subconsciously made the decision to leave or that they aren't happy. And so when it comes to turnover, and I think about the expense of that a lot, for hourly workers, I think they said it was $1,500 to replace every hourly worker. For salaried, it was, I want to say like 30% of your salary. But if you're a highly technical worker, it was 150% of your salary. And so when you look at it that way, it's like, man, it was really easy to blow off burnout, to make an excuse, right? To say, well, that's just so-and-so being dramatic. But when you start to think about the ripple effect of that, it's like you want to get it while it's ripples and not dominoes, right?
Yes. It makes me think of the phrase that came out for a while, quiet quitting. I used to call it retired in seat as well. But this is something that's happening. And the interesting thing was I saw a lot of HR pros or executives being almost like mad at employees for retiring in seat instead of looking at it and being like, why is that happening? I don't think it's because people love showing up and phoning it in every day for work. Like especially if they've got a job where there has to be in a certain seat all day long, they have to show up to an office. Like nobody wants to do that. It makes the day go by so freaking slow and painfully. And so like taking it a step back and saying, why does this person feel this way? And what can we do about it from an organization? And when you were talking, it also made me think about, the way my brain works, I've been characterized as neurodivergent. And what I've learned more recently about myself is I am highly prone just psychologically to burnout because I'm the type of person where it's like, give your best. I do that all of the time and not in like a sustainable way. So I am all in so hardcore all of the time. I just go like bananas. And that's I've had teammates or colleagues in the past say like, don't care more than the owner of this organization because you'll burn yourself out, or don't care. It's like, I have a personality where I just like care so deeply that I can just spin myself up in cycles. And when I look at my career, I have left every organization in 3 to 5 years consistently. And I have always told myself, well, that is the way that I've grown. And I've, been somebody who's made $500,000 a year or whatever in my career. And like, sure, that's a silver lining. And I am an eternal optimist. So that makes a ton of sense that I would say that. But a lot of it is I get completely upside down in the role. I don't know how to self-regulate and I burn myself out. And it seems like nobody cares. And I'm just working myself to death. And then it becomes almost annoying. And it definitely becomes hard to manage when you're a person like me. I'm a person that's hard to manage, I guess is what I'm saying, because I've got this insatiable appetite to work and to
love self-awareness.
Therapy, Lydia, lots of therapy. Shout out to my therapist. But like what this has helped me to understand is that is a really difficult thing to be around if you're a more regulated person that is okay with like coming into work, leaving work at the end of the day. A person like me is exhausting because it's just never enough. And so from a leadership perspective, I have to recognize like most people do not care as much as me. They are not going to. And when I hear leaders say like, they just don't have ownership mentality, it's like, stop. Of course they don't. Of course they don't have ownership mentality. They don't own this place. They make a set dollar amount. You need to like reinforce how they connect the purpose and how their job impacts the overall mission of the company. There's things around that, but they're not going to have ownership mentality most generally. You want them to care, you want them to be loyal, but you don't want it to be the cause of their own personal burnout. Yeah. And you're right. It's taken me a ton of years to understand why I am the way that I am, why my work history looks the way that it does, and how that can impact me in owning my own business now. But that turnover is almost inevitable if you have the type of brain that I have, but also if you're a person like me who's a leader pushing other people, like you're going to burn them out too. So I like looking at it from that like holistic perspective of what type of leader are you? What type of employee are you? And how does this impact? And then how can you find fulfillment outside the workplace? So that way you don't turn into a Tasmanian devil and then poop out on the floor and then quit because you don't know how to get back up.
Yeah. So this is wild. Well, one, I totally relate because, well, entrepreneur here, love to, run, go get it. I very much associate with being a high achiever, and there's a thrill with that, right? The other day I had worked on a project and I ended my day and it was a great day. I knocked everything off my list. And I was like, wow, that never happens. Do you know how long that gratification lasted? 20 minutes.
Oh, I'm surprised. 20 was long. Yeah. Good for you for holding on to it for 20.
It's been 20 minutes. Oh my gosh. Practice some gratitude for yourself. But it's funny because with Healium, we see a lot of high achievers using it. And you put on VR glasses, right? And you hook up your brain, EEG headband, or your Apple Watch. And it forces you to stop and take a moment of pause and truly just clear your mind. And that's what the score is set on, right? Like your ability to clear your mind. And high achievers, we need that so much. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we will run and run and run, and we will run in the wrong direction and we'll burn out and we won't even have gotten the right things done, right? And so as an employer, I think it's so important to realize that your high achievers, they need that moment to pause for peace or even just to think through. Oh, this is what I'm working on. This is how it's affecting me. Like that actual strategy component, of what got me here won't get me there. So I need to sit down and reassess what it is that we're doing right now. And there's just not enough permission to pause, particularly when it comes to leadership.
So true. And you hear so many organizations say like, oh, we're looking for the unicorns or the hard chargers or the driven ones, or they can thrive in the fast-paced environment or whatever it is. Like almost all employers are saying that. This is like the message that we give out there. Mm-hmm. And then if you do hire one of those stallions like you or I, you better be ready to strap a saddle on that person and help them navigate through your workplace Or two, you're going to take other people who aren't naturally bent that way, and you're going to constantly make them feel like they're unvalued or you're disappointed in them. And they're going to be dissatisfied as well. So first step is like self-awareness of the leader. Like it all is going to stem from there. So helping the leader know like, hey, this is how you are. This is how this affects you. This is how this could affect your employees. And then doing an assessment on every single individual, learning the way they work, whether it's predictive index or culture index or Herman brain dominance or Myers-Briggs or whatever it is, but doing some things that help people to understand themselves and the people around them. It's not going to be perfect. And some of us we're just different in that way. But I think opening the conversation is a really, really great first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting watching people who are, so I didn't notice it as much until I had kids, right? Because I had all this extra time is what I'm going to call it. Time I don't have anymore. And so I still feel that pressure to keep up, and to work the late hours and to work the weekends. And that is not what is valued here. And I really love and appreciate that, because more is caught than is taught, right? Like you can have all of the right words and say all of the right things, but if it's not what the people around you are doing, then, at any rate, it's interesting to note how much your employees really notice what you do and not what you say.
Gosh, yeah, so true. And I would say this is the first time in my life, I'll be 42 in a few months. And the first time in my life that like I sent my kid to summer camp, like he always does. He does about a month worth of 3 different summer camps over the summer. And I was driving back. I dropped him off at the first camp of the summer this morning. And I was thinking, just taking some time to reflect, which is a big part of my life now, on previous years like this. And there have been so many years that I took the time when he was at summer camp to work more. And I booked him after school programs so I could work more, and nannies and babysitters a lot of times so I could work more. And it's sad to me. It's sad to me that it's taken me this many years to get where I'm at mentally, where I recognize that's not where the value's at. It's taken me this many years to pick up some fiction books again and realize like everything in my life does not have to be productive. Like it's okay to read. And I'm not saying reading fiction books aren't productive, because they're good for the brain in a lot of different ways. But for me, I have not picked up a fiction book in over 20 years, and I am a voracious reader, but I've only read nonfiction because I have to be productive at all times, even in my downtime. And I've started reading fiction books again, and I can't tell you how much satisfaction I'm getting from it. They're entertaining for sure, but I feel good about myself knowing that I'm prioritizing something that like doesn't matter, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's not a productive use of my time, but it is massively good for me. And that's taken me a long time to get there. And I just hope that I can help help those who have the same struggles as me or that are younger than me and want to be on the come up like I've wanted to be on for so long. I climbed this ladder, chased it so hard, chased it into the ground for me. And I want to help them realize like, you will either hit where I'm at, which is a massive crash and burn, where you reevaluate everything in your life. And maybe you'll move to a 140-acre farm and leave suburbia, or you can balance yourself along the way and enjoy work, which is like a novel idea, but I'm actually doing it now. Enjoy your work, enjoy your life. And you don't have to like kill yourself for 20 years to get to a place where you can enjoy later. I didn't get it. It's a major change. So you mentioned earlier, we can't necessarily, it's not a line on the P&L, but we know that people need to have some data and some facts to actually make some change. So what are some additional thoughts that you've got around what burnout is costing you and how we can make this a little more like objective for people?
So I would encourage you to look through your specific business and how you pay people in terms of like whether it's hourly or salaried, and just start to put some play around with it numbers on there and think about your team. If my team is checked out for 20% of the day, what does that cost me? Just use it as play, because it will make you increasingly aware that staff lunch, that team builder that you thought you didn't have time for, that you thought was super expensive. You know what? It's not. That $5,000 software that everyone wants because it's going to make their life so much better. And you think, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. When you really start to look at the numbers, it will change the way you make decisions. And even though it is not a line on the P&L, it will affect the bottom line of your P&L. And I think if you manage it well, it will affect it for the better.
Do you think 20% is kind of a good rule of thumb to start out with? Just
I think that's the nice number I'm giving.
I agree. I agree. It's modest.
I think how you will notice if you're like, is this me? Or my team's not burnt out, or whatever it is. If you text your team, a member on your team, and they don't message you back, and I would say this is probably true, especially of younger people, because like our phones are attached to our hips. It is telling to me when you tell me you have not gotten my message because of XYZ reason. Unless you're like, I don't know, if you're on vacation or you're at the lake or like, those are very different extenuating circumstances. No, what it tells me is that I wasn't a priority for you. And I'm not saying do this habitually. Like if you're a leader and you're texting people all the time when they're off the clock, that's really not cool. Like you should just not do that. But like every once in a while, we all know that emergencies are going to pop up, and how quickly they are to respond to whatever the thing is, in my opinion, is very telling. So that's a good sign and a good gauge of how engaged someone is or bought into what it is that you're doing. And if they're not all bought in, sometimes that's okay too. They don't have to be like all the way off the deep end, right? But think of this as a scale of burnout to full-blown buy. Where are they on the scale? And then start playing with that imaginary calculator that we just started talking about. What do you expect, for the price that you pay? And where are they on that? And what can you do? Like, don't worry about this other person. Here's the funny thing. For the most part, this is all controlled by what you do and the actions you can control and you can own. And you want to know the other crazy part of this? Most of it starts with fixing it by just listening. Just actively listen. That means don't talk. Let them vent. Let them tell you how it's really going. And when they say good, say, no, really, how's it going? I'm serious. I want to know. And like, give them that moment and that space.
Yeah, when you're talking about doing the text test, which I think is a pretty interesting one, I used to do, and you know what? I need to do that in my current organization. It was a little bitty tiny thing, but now it's starting to grow. I used to do, what did I call that? The unspoken rules. So I used to do this Word document of unspoken rules. And I started it when I was at a mortgage company well over a decade ago. And to be on my team, here are the unspoken rules of my team. And so I started the document, and it was like, if Kerri's door is shut, that doesn't mean she's in a bad mood. She's having a hard time focusing and has a deadline to meet. Like, shoot her a message if you really need something. It doesn't mean that she's mad or blah, blah, blah. And so I started like listing some things out. And then I took the Word document and I sent it to my team and said, add in the other things about me or each other, the department, the organization. And so when a new person either transfers into our team or starts at the organization at the first time, they have got a leg up compared to what you did when you first started here. And do you know this thing ended up being almost 3 pages long of these open rules? I loved that document though, because what I did was, instead of just sending this on to people, I would sit there and at the very initial meeting when somebody would come to my team, I would explain these things. These are the unspoken rules, and here's how we develop this document. But I want to run you through this so you can understand your colleagues. And we would do that at our first team meeting where everyone's present. So the information's level set, and we could laugh and play and joke around with each other, but like call it what it was. And it was essentially rules of engagement. And it would be like, Kerri's going to do a lot of her emailing at night, because at the time I had a little one that like would go to bed at 7:30. So I would work a couple of hours in the evening after I put him to bed because I wanted to play, when I picked him up from daycare. And so it was like, Kerri's doing a lot of emailing at night. What I was doing was emailing it and saying, just don't open it. Don't worry about it. But the team, what I figured out was either it would cause them anxiety, or somebody else would answer and they felt like that person would become my favorite or whatever. So I started doing this was back before it was cool, to send the emails the next morning or whatever at 7:30. And I learned that by creating these unspoken rules for my team, just by being honest and being like, here's where I'm at. And they would be like, oh yeah, that's fine. And then, they would be honest with me. Well, here's the way this looks on the team, and here's how I interact with this. And I don't mind working at night too. And I was creating the wrong culture. And so it made me change some of my behaviors. And it's that like reflection, that leader reflection, and then allowing people to speak into that and say, here's how your behavior impacts me, and listen. And that's where team culture is truly built, because, it's going to be built whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's a great example of stopping to pause, because you took a moment to be like, wait a minute, this is what they're saying, and I need to sit with this.
Yeah.
I can actually use this for everyone's advantage and be purposeful in that meeting. And then it moves better for everyone.
Yeah. And if I was being honest with myself, when I had leaders that, when you end up in an executive role, you get ignorant in a lot of ways to how you're impacting people. But if I took the time to think of when I wasn't in an executive role and how I would have responded when an executive emailed me, I wanted to climb the ladder. I wanted to come across trustworthy. I wanted to come across like I was prioritizing the organization. So I would have stopped what I was doing, having a nice dinner with my husband or whatever it was, because I didn't have good boundaries back then, to answer the message, because I was trying to get somewhere in my career. And I thought that's how I would get there, is to show them or answer them or whatever it is. And so if I'm being realistic with myself and self-aware enough to know, like, sure, I'm at the executive level now. So if I want to blow an email off and say I was having dinner with my spouse, like, good for me. Look at me setting good boundaries. But like, employees don't always feel that way. And we're setting the tone. And so that's really important, to take that time to reflect and let your people tell you how that feels, but also remember how it used to feel for you. Like, don't get ignorant to, your process on how you got to where you're at.
Yeah.
So we talked about what burnout costs you. Let's talk about what turnover is really costing as well. And we went through a little bit of the data. You said 14 or 1,500 for a more entry-level employee. Mm-hmm. I just want to throw out, from an HR perspective, for a subject matter professional. So let's say a support task expert, let's say that's like an entry-level employee. And I agree, a little bit easier to fill, but you also have to have true value on that, how long their training takes for them to get up to speed, to where you can cut them loose to do the tasks and all. So there's a lot that goes into it. But let's say a subject matter professional, so somebody who's more like maybe at a client management level, maybe has a certain degree to get into the role. A lot of these roles are now requiring recruiters to hire them. A lot of organizations don't have their own recruiters. They're using external recruiters. And I see a variety in price, and I have a few different partners that I partner with that have a variety in price, but a lot of them are taking 20% of the first year salary. Mm-hmm. I've seen 40% of the first year salary. Or you hire a strategy company, which I've got one of my partners that does that, but that's an ongoing, you get on their software, and that's an ongoing reoccurring expense. So yes, it's cheaper per position, but if you look cumulatively over the course of the year, depending on how many roles you're hiring, they all come at a cost, I'm saying. So you can literally put that as a line item on your P&L. You can probably look to see what recruitment has cost you, or you can look at what you're paying your full-time recruiter in HR, or your HR person who also has to do recruitment, and then they can't spend time on culture and onboarding because they're recruiting all these roles. So I do feel like a lot of people think that they can't put a dollar amount to it, but I just spit out like 7 different ways that you can chunk out some money to determine what it's actually costing you. Do you have a dedicated trainer? And if you don't, the time that it's taken that individual who's doing client-facing work to actually train. There's just a lot of ways that you can split this up and see what the cost is. I would say, like, don't be lazy. Look at the cost. To be a responsible business owner and determine what this is costing you, and then make an educated decision on whether or not. It's the same way with client acquisition. It's like fun from a marketing perspective to get out there and acquire new clients. So many of us are not giving great service to our pre-existing clients, and we're just losing them. Cost of acquiring is so much harder. You've already got this person who trusts you, but we're doing the same thing with employees almost. We're like marketing to all these employees, and we're trying to get people to come in. Well, we've got all of these employees like already in our house that we could serve and love and invest in. It's such a juxtaposition to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you're saying this, it just makes me want to I'm calling it a backwards P&L. Like our P&L is very much structured based on what tax professionals want you to do, right? Like that's the reason that many people keep it in the format that they keep it in. But in reality, how we make decisions about things, the metrics we measure what success looks like, what things actually cost us. If you started to say, these are all the things that I want to care about, and you had to somehow, whatever the way is, come up with a calculation to add that to your P&L, it's like, what would it look like if you had permission to build it the way that you wanted it to be?
Yeah.
I think people would run their business much differently, put it that way.
Yeah. So speaking of, what do you think as a leader or a business owner, if they're listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure my team is probably burnout or we're on our way there. What are some recommendations you would make on what they can do to address that?
So I think that first depends on, is this an individual thing or is it a team? Like is your entire team exhausted? Because I think taking a moment to stop and listen, taking a moment to say thank you, right? Like, and genuinely mean it. Spread the praise. Stop, have, whether it's like a team lunch, doesn't have to be like a crazy expensive thing. It's more about giving them permission to stop and like, please don't make it a 4:30 happy hour where they're going to be late getting home to their family. Like this needs to be like genuinely something in the middle of your workday that they can actually enjoy. And so in a previous company that I worked with, everyone was eligible for these activities except for support because support always had to be open. And the unfortunate thing is support's the one that deals with the complaints all the time, right? Or the biggest challenges from the customer standpoint. And so it just be very thoughtful about what you do and what you're rewarding and what you're saying you value or don't value, because people will take whatever it is that you do and kind of pick it apart, And that doesn't mean that's a reason not to try, because you have to start somewhere. So I would say if you have a team that's burnt out, that's a good thing. If you have an individual that's burnt out, I would start, honestly, one, check in on them, all the same things that you would have done for, the team at large. But two, Healium has 4 free experiences that they can try. If they download the mobile app, you don't even need a VR device. Give them space and time to just like, hey, I found this really cool thing. Thought you might want to go check it out. You're welcome to try it. And maybe they all have little like spa dates, virtual spa dates, right? Where you give everyone 15 minutes in the day and they can go do this thing. It's really just being thoughtful and conscientious and almost in a way that doesn't make someone feel singled out though. You wouldn't want to do something like that in a group setting. It's definitely something you'd want to give them permission to go have space and do on their own.
Yeah. And I like the intentionality behind it, because we know the reality is if you say, like using Healium, for example, okay, go download this app and do this and, let me know how it goes. An employee hears you say, keep doing all of your work, add a new thing to it and report back to me. Great. Another task or assignment. Like you are totally missing the mark as an employer. And so really carving out the time and showing them that you value that. And like, spoiler alert, if they question that they're able to do that during the workday, or they feel like they don't have time to do that, your team's burnout and you're losing them.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Flashing red light there.
Right.
That's so true. Oh, gosh, that made me think of something else. It'll probably come back to me. Let's talk about if your team is impacted by someone else's burnout. So whether you've got a leader that's burnout or a colleague that's burnout, what do they do then?
Are you asking from the leader's perspective or the colleague's perspective?
Either one.
Okay. From a leader's perspective, it always starts with a check-in. But two, they do have to have a sense of accountability. I think they need awareness for how their actions affect others. And a lot of times people just don't know, or they just didn't think. And whatever you do, it cannot come out as an accusation. Like you have to gut check yourself, because this has to come from a place of I'm here to help you as your leader, not I'm here to manage you as your leader. because it's going to come out in the word choices that you make and the body language that you give off. And so, like, you first need to go, one, figure out the problem and then come to peace with whatever plan you have to help this person through it. And that might be giving them a little bit of space, which might be even harder when you need them and you're short staffed. Like, there are times when this is going to be a conscious choice that you make and it's not going to be easy. In fact, the fact that you're addressing it is actually harder than letting it go in the short term. So you kind of got to figure that out, you know?
Yes, that's so true.
As a colleague, it's kind of similar in that you want to be there to help someone. You don't want to be their doormat. And sometimes, what is it? When helping is hurting, you have to be mindful that the action you're taking, what to step up and fill in the gaps. Is this actually helpful to this person? Do they even know you're doing it? Or are they just like living in their own little la la land? Or is it hurtful in the sense that you're burning out? They don't even know. I would say in a healthy organization, people should be able to raise their hand, and just kind of gut check on that person first. I would always recommend that, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't stay silent. That is the worst thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for the other person.
Yeah. I've got a practical example so I had a team of essentially client managers, client-facing individuals, and I had a hard time when I joined this organization getting them to spend time together, do any type of team building or collaboration, attend meetings even, because they were all like entirely too busy. And that's just what I kept hearing. But I saw that some people handled it better than others. And so the very first thing that I did was get my hands on some reports and just showed them. They had never, I guess, like had a little healthy competition on looking at their books of business and comparing them to each other. Now, varying degrees of complexity. I understand there's variables in play, but I was able to say, like, here's how much revenue you're impacting. Here's how much revenue you're impacting. Client files, client count, on and on and on. Drilled the data down and created like a dashboard. And, I would call it a leaderboard, but a dashboard where they could see the data. And that was like the first step that I took, is just bringing awareness to the data, showing them that I'm looking at the data, showing the data to them with regularity, then letting them know that I was making hiring decisions based on the data. And anybody who had too large of a book that they couldn't actually manage, which was the case in a couple people, I would bring someone in to help support them. We ended up actually having an individual who wanted to retire, but she didn't want to fully retire. She wanted to work part-time. She kind of became our like floater to help anybody who was overwhelmed during that time. And by bringing that as like a centralized offering to everyone, it wasn't like, oh, we're going to come clean up your files because you're a hot mess and you can't get on top of your work. It was like, you have a heavier load right now, so this person's going to float and support you. And we're going to use the data to tell us when you're no longer overwhelmed. And it took the emotional aspect out of it. And it was a highly emotional environment when I first got there. And I'm not saying that everyone just removed their emotions because they're humans, but what I saw is with regularity, looking at the data and assessing it, it helped people to see, okay, this person sees that I have too much on my plate right now, and help is going to come in a systematic way, not making me feel like it's punitive or whatever. It's because the data shows it. And on the other side, if they had a smaller book of business, but were coming across as overwhelmed and unhelpful to others, we would do additional training. So that was helping with our like learning and development opportunities. Now, did everyone love the way that I was running this? Like, no, it was very uncomfortable. Some people would rather just be emotional and have emotional responses. So I do things in a very like black and white way, but it was the best way that I could see from a practical level to come in and impact this workplace and truly determine who had heavier loads than others and who didn't, and where the training was needed. And then when it was time to hire the next person versus just saying, she's losing her mind over here, we just need to hire another person, because I don't want to lay off later. I want to make good data-driven decisions on when it is time to bring on another person. So that's when that operations mindset comes in. And I think a lot of listeners listening to this are going to think, great, well, I don't have somebody in my organization with that skill set. Hire a fractional to come in and assess your workloads of your people. Don't hire somebody long-term if you're not sure if this is a long-term fit or you're afraid of spending the money. get a contract worker in there to assess this with you and improve your business, set you on a path and move on. And good contractors will help you heal and won't stay on your P&L forever. If they're truly a good fractional, especially a fractional operations person, they don't want to camp out on your P&L because they don't want to be another thing on your P&L that's not bringing you value. So I would recommend doing those deep dive assessments. It takes time. I get it, but it will transform your business for the long run.
Yeah. And your team will tell them stuff they're not going to tell you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. They become like workplace besties. It's a great way to get information. Yes, I love being a consultant in that way, as long as I'm being responsible with that information and I'm not like getting the inside scoop and then like spinning it. I get the information. I talk to the leader. We make a plan. So yeah, it's all about finding that right fit for a consultant, but so true.
I would also just add, be present over perfect. Like all of this, there is no perfect scenario or perfect way to handle all of these various stages of people with burnout, because it's just like complex. And you just got to try. And sometimes you just have to own it. Like, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. I recognize this might not be perfect, but this is the best way that I can think of right now to do this quickly. So we're just going to try it and we're going to see how it goes. And in the end, we'll reassess. And most normal people will be like, okay. And that's the end of it.
Yes.
And it's just amazing how if you don't say that, sometimes they think it's going to be forever. And it's like, no, this is just what we're going to do for right now. So just remember, present over perfect.
Yeah. So when you say most normal people will feel that way, here's what I would add. If trust is low, your people are going to be really hypercritical of you. They're going to question your motives. They're going to question your intent. And so if you let folks know we're going to be doing a workload analysis or a workflow assessment and they freak out, again, flashing red light to you as a leader, trust is low in your organization. You need to address that because you're not getting the most out of your people. They don't trust you.
Yep.
Okay, I've got my next questions around vacation, but this reminds me, we were talking about monetizing or attaching a dollar amount to what a burnout or turnover can do. When you take a look at, let's say somebody's a full-time employee, they're averaging 40 hours a week. In HR land, we call that a 2080. So that's like how many hours they're working in a year. We use 2080 to assess a lot of different things, whether it's an hourly pay amount or how many hours they're eligible for FMLA or HR uses that number for a lot. So if you're HR pro, of course, you're like, yeah, 2080. I knew that, but a lot of other people don't. So when you take your 2080, let's say you take 20% off the bat on inefficiencies, time wasted because of burnout, drama, communication, whatever it is. That's a pretty safe number. Then take their PT, their paid time off, and do that in the calculation as well, because these are benefits that you're not just giving them to get people in the organization and then not letting them actually use. This is time that you actually want them to take to replenish. I feel like people don't enter that into the calculation of time because they're maybe just hoping that their people just work all of the time. So don't forget when you're doing these calculations to also put paid time off in there, because you are offering that as a benefit. It hits your books. That's time that you're expecting to pay in vacation time, not time that you're expecting them to work and further the burnout. So don't forget that in the calculation. Okay. So speaking of what can you, oh yeah, go for it.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So while we're thinking about it, not spook people as they're going through these calculations, think through, you're paying them, let's say $100,000 a year. Okay. 15% of that goes to various taxes to employ them. So you might as well just add that up.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to a podcast with two numbers women right now. So they're getting what they paid for today. Okay. So let's say, speaking of pay time off, what can you do when someone's asking to take a vacation, but it's not an option? Either you can't afford to give them the time off, or they can't afford to take it because they've already like exhausted their paid time off. What can you do in that event when this person's needing a break?
Clean is not the legal answer.
We are not attorneys, so that's all right.
Out. I am a student that fair is not always equal. Okay. Everyone's workload is not always equal. How much time, energy they put into things is not always equal. nor is the amount of their skill that they put towards the position equal. And at the end of the day, from a business standpoint, right, you're trying to get the most out of this person. And so it becomes a question of where are you at with this person? I'm a fan of, like, if it's me, okay, let me give me as an example. So I love dock days. Dock days are great for me because we go to the lake and there's not great internet. Okay. And when I go there, I'm not really working. I can go there and sit on the dock and work and be unplugged. And it's amazing what I get done when I'm unplugged. The hard part about that is it's very subjective. How much time did you spend working? Did you, were you like fully connected? Was it your normal role? And like, I would say that sometimes those moments are amplifiers for me, and that 20 minutes of like deep work may be worth so much more of not deep work. And so it's not really the HR answer, but if you love the person, I would find a way to work with them. And maybe it is that you say, look, I want you just to take a day and go do, this, and just kind of give them a mini assignment in which technically they're working, but really it also gives them breathing space. You haven't violated these HR rules because we have to treat people fairly, right?
Yeah.
So it just gets sticky and muddy as far as if they can't leave, because some people have that, right? Like if you're an air traffic controller, if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, like you can't just like up and leave the building. Okay. I think Healium is a great solution. Shameless plug here, because you get a virtual vacation for 15 minutes and you're not distracted, because in VR, it's fully immersive, right? And so you feel like, they've done studies. People feel like they're on the beach. It's crazy how much more effective it is. And so even if it's not Healium, I would encourage you to find something that you can do that is out of the box, right? Like it's not what you typically would go to. And I think when you put a lot of effort into thinking through it, you'll start seeing results.
Yeah, I love that. And from an HR perspective, when I'm working with a client or an organization and they want to make an exception for an employee outside of the policy, like that is within your right. That is within your right. Now, there's a few different variables at play that I'm going to ask. Why are we valuing this person more? How did we get here? And it's okay to say, like, because you're a human and they're being a human and you want to support and love them. Like that makes sense. I just want to understand the why behind it and the intentionality. If somebody else was in the same position, would they get the same treatment? If the position was similar, like that's an okay question to ask. If another person wouldn't warrant that same level of treatment, are you dealing with that performance issue? Is that person on an employee performance improvement plan? Have you rated them correctly in their performance review? Do you give them a lower increase or no increase at all in the last performance cycle, so they are clear on why they wouldn't be able to get some of this treatment? So it's not that you can't go outside of the box with people. You can, like, that's part of the beauty of being a business owner, is you can do the next right thing, but you have to make sure that there's intentionality behind it. And just because you're tired and you don't want to deal with an issue is not an answer. So yeah, I love finding alternative ways to show reward and recognition and value to people. But when I say systematic approach, a lot of people think HR is here to like gatekeep and lock the policy down and say no, no, no to everything. But the truth is, like, I just want to see that you're a consistent leader with intentionality, and that you are, with the same level of intentionality, deciding to reward somebody above and beyond. If you feel like you have to hide the reward for someone else, there's probably something that you need to check in your gut. Like it's something that to be celebrated. Because if you do that to an employee, if you give them something above and beyond, but they have to keep that secret, just know that doesn't feel good for them, because they're working with their colleagues every day. So to have like a private secret with you, that like feels good for a minute, maybe 20 minutes. But then when they can't share with the team member where they were or what, whatever it is, think about what you're doing for them. And is that truly a reward for them? So, okay. Anything else you'd add before we wrap today?
Sometimes I always hear this from Andy Stanley, and I really like it because we are like one person. Do for one what you wish you could do for all.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just gotta try. Like the first step is trying, and you'll figure it out as you go along. right? But don't let fear paralyze you or stop you. And take a moment to go through the calculator.
Yeah.
And I think you'll find you make your decisions.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I loved our time together today, and I am going to link Healium, Lydia's page on LinkedIn, and a few other things in our show notes today, so you can keep in touch with her and that organization, so you can learn more if you want to. Folks, I would say that running your own business or leading in another organization can feel like chaos. Handling the complexities of employees inside of your organization is chaotic. Talking about burnout and turnover and all of that can be very scary, but these are things that you can address. These are muscles that you can grow in your business. I would say don't shy away from it. You can thrive in it. Till next time.